Hi, my name is Chris Davis. I'm a professor of history at Lone Star College. Um, I'm going to jump right into the presentation. I've got several slides, and I know we've only got 30 minutes, and I want to be sure we save some time for questions. So this presentation is for especially those faculty who are a bit hesitant to embrace AI into their classroom. I want to state at the outset, this is not an anti-AI presentation or take. I myself am not a tech Luddite. Um, I, for the moment, am reluctant to permit AI in student writing assignments. And my kind of space on this is I want to wait and see how best we can incorporate this rather than, as many have called, just embrace it, just use it, just do it. Um, I, I can very well see in the future, maybe even the near future, where I will incorporate or utilize more of these tools. In fact, I already have an AI bonus assignment that's low stakes. But there are some of us who still value it might be a bad word, traditional writing process and think that there's utility in students even struggling with writing and developing their own thoughts and ideas. But this is not an anti-AI presentation. It is more so an approach for those of us who are unready or unwilling to completely embrace that in graded student writing. So I'm going to go over a few things. I think one of the most important things is setting policy expectations, talking openly with students about your policies and your positions, what is permitted, what isn't, and doing it in a kind of disarming way. I think especially if you've got a class with a lot of students, especially if they're first year students who are perhaps insecure about their own writing and might be incentivized or tempted to just use AI because they're self-conscious about the way their writing appears on discussion boards or being graded by a professor with a PhD. You can see where the use of AI might be beneficial, but it also might be a way out. And so I think it's important to let students know, especially if it's not an English class necessarily, that you're not grading them on being outstanding scholars, or in my case, producing original pieces of historical scholarship, that it's not an English class if it's not an English class, and that their writing style, you understand that they are undergraduate students, that this is a first year survey course if it is, to be a bit disarming and reduce those tensions and barriers that students sometimes feel when they submit writing. Another thing I'm going to talk about in soliciting original writing samples, diversifying the kind of sources and assignments, the way we write our own writing prompts, and the way we grade them based on fidelity to questions. So as I mentioned, setting out, I've got my syllabus statement here, and I'm going to run through these slides, but I want to let people know that I'm happy to make this presentation available in a PDF. On some of these, I have a lot of text, which I don't usually do in PowerPoint, but they're examples of some of my policies. So I think it's important. I actually have a syllabus statement on AI in addition to my, academic honesty policies that are mandated by the system. I think it's important to talk about academic integrity and clearly define the kinds of technology that are permitted in the class, and be comprehensive about the instructions and not just in your syllabi, but in your course orientations, in your overviews, and in discussions with students, and in announcements that I post before a writing assignment opens up. So here's one of my course overviews that I usually film. And I address this, and I try to be disarming and honest with my students, right? And I just tell them, right now I'm not ready to incorporate this tool, rather than taking some kind of binary position that somehow AI is bad, or we should all fear it, or you're not going to be a good writer if you use it, or you're going to be punished somehow. And so getting into the kinds of assignments we use, I mean, I have had to rewrite most of my writing assignments. And I think what's important is, I think initially too, is to solicit an original writing sample from students. So I do this for online classes in a discussion board. Some people might have different views on this, but I have increased the word count. I personalized the questions, and as I spoke in a session yesterday, I don't like being the plagiarism police. I don't want to. But if you're going to use AI detectors, or if you're not going to permit it and you're using the naked eye in your experience, I think it's good to try to get anyway, an original writing sample from students. So day one of my course, week one really, I have students post a bio about themselves and answer some very personalized questions. Here you've got some examples. Say a little bit about yourself, what's your favorite book or film, what's your intended major, what you hope to get out of this class. And so we do have typically an original, unguarded, unvarnished writing sample from students that, should the need arise later in the course, we might be able to compare it. I know this is an imperfect system. I always did this anyway, soliciting this original writing from students. And of course, I want to know about them. It's all part of the introductory part of the course. But this is a good way to, if there are questions that arise later in the semester where students have submitted graduate level essay work that uses perfect idiomatic expressions, free of all kinds of mistakes, but their introductory discussion post was diametrically opposed to that writing sample. This can be useful in a discussion with students. Assignments and strategies. So I was moving this direction anyway, but I think for those of us who've had, text-heavy assignments, whether it's in history or English or any other type of humanities class, I think it's really helpful to diversify our sources for its own sake, but also in this age of AI where it is more tempting when you have text-based assignments to use it in an unethical way that's prescribed by your syllabus and your course policy. Podcast, films, documentary videos, images. These are sources that AI is less easily able to mimic and draw from. As I was reminded by my colleague Tim yesterday, some of these more advanced AI tools, you can actually give it a podcast and it will somehow listen to it and be able to give you answers. But we're still a bit a ways off from AI to be able to do that very easily. Certainly, it's harder to do than if you just give it a text prompt, you have an article or a book you were supposed to read, and it can summarize and answer questions for you. With podcast, films, for the most part, students actually have to watch these things, right? And if you tether your questions to specific parts of the films, then it's more difficult, and it's less incentive for students to rely on AI to generate answers in a academically dishonest way. Also, we know that like with ChatGPT 3, the unpaid versions, some of their data is limited from the internet. Up to the latest I know is up to 2021. So if you're using, podcasts and films and that came out more recently, that's another way to skirt AI. Also using rubrics I've got down here. I'm a big fan of rubrics. You can consider more heavily weighting your grading, your rubric, based on the way they personalize the question and how closely they answer the question. Oftentimes AI answers are more generic. And so you can heavily weight that if you want to guard against some of that. Here I've got some examples. I use podcasts. Here I've got one from Clay Jenkinson. This is for a history class I've used. And here you can see some of the questions over here on the right. I still require citations. It's just time-based media citations. And I've asked students, I've even appointed students. This is about an hour-long podcast. I usually don't use them that long, but here I've even directed students, right? From around the 27 to 35-minute marks of the podcast, these particular historians are discussing whether the founders had the opportunity to end or curtail slavery. And my question, what does Ellis see as the missed opportunity? So here, I'm trying to be both very specific, but also vague. But students will actually have to listen to this podcast in that section of the podcast and know what this specific historian says about that. If you just typed into Google or AI, what did some of the founders do to try to end slavery or not? You could get all kinds of answers. But here I've specifically asked this historian who's on this podcast. AI is not going to know that, at least not yet. And so you can get a more tethered answer to your question. Here, how does the listener feel about Jefferson? This was a call-in listener on this podcast who said something about this. I don't even know his name, but if you are listening around the 45-minute, 30-second mark, you will know that that listener who wrote in that they discussed on this podcast, that is not something that AI or even Google is going to be able to locate and give the answer that you know that you're looking for. Films also. Here I've done a documentary film. And again, all of these I use as open educational resources. If you're at Lone Star, we have a huge collection of both films, podcasts, digital books. If you're at another institution, I'm sure your library has certain subscriptions to videos and podcasts and things like that. Also, students love them. I still give reading assignments in my class. It is a history class after all, but they like listening to podcasts. They like watching films. They like watching feature films. They'll do it with their family and their friends. So I've done similar things here, right? Here's, this kind of balance to vagueness and specificity. Listen to the historians in the segment starting around the 11-minute mark and draw on their insights to formulate a response to this question. You have to watch this film to be able to answer that question. That is not something you can plug into AI or Google and get a specific answer about. This next question over here on the left, which of these historical episodes of lynchings was most striking to you and why? It's a 30-minute documentary film. It goes through about 5 episodes or vignettes of different regrettable, awful lynching episodes across the southern United States. You won't know that unless you watch the film all the way through to then select one and comment on it. Giving quotes from the film, asking, do you agree? Do you disagree? I also find it useful to manage the sources your students are using. I assign them the primary source documents. I assign them the articles. Now, the disadvantage of this is students aren't off doing research on their own, but depending on the class, if it's a first year undergraduate introductory level survey course, I'm more confident giving students the kinds of sources I want them to interrogate and use. And you can give them choices, but I think the more you kind of, I don't want to say control, but have oversight over these sources, and then what's in the sources, as opposed to getting a text response of, an AI that hallucinated a source or, 100 different sources that you might not have read or know what's in, rather keeping the class together, focusing on some particular sources that what's in the sources and if it matches how the students are using and drawing on them. I would also, here I've got, and for open educational resources, there's just any number of primary sources, whether it's the humanities or history class. Use photos, maps, and other visuals. Here I've got some questions over here on the right. I get this from Stanford, Reading Like a Historian. But we've got some images. We've got excerpts of primary sources, and ask the students to answer these questions. And if they've got the source with them, they know you've assigned it, then they know and if they're manageable, right? I'm constantly trying to pare down the amount of work and the amount of reading I'm giving my students. And I think that also helps in skirting AI. If it's a page or two of a text rather than a 30-page article or a 300-page book, you can really still distill that kind of information. And if the students only have to read a page or two, answer a set of questions, it's more manageable and there's less of an incentive to violate your academic dishonesty policy. Here I've used books from our database, our research library database, where we have entire books online. And I know at Lone Star and perhaps at your institution, you can actually request certain books in digital format. Here I've used one in my Texas history class. You'll notice we have unlimited license usage. Students can access this book inside the course. This is a 6-chapter book. I don't use the entire thing, but again, it's online, virtual, it's free. And I've asked the students to use this text. I've read this text. I know it. I can use the search feature in this text, because another problem when you assign a variety of sources or various editions of paperback books, with AI, It can scramble the sources. Students can say it's from a different edition if the quotes don't line up. But here, if you've got, again, working on the same page, so to speak, I find is also really helpful. Here I've got a list of open educational resources that I've used, online textbooks. And I realize that for certain disciplines, they're not as effective or useful, but for history, they just are. And again, everyone's working on the same page. I can go back, I can reference exactly what was said, where something in a chapter was sourced. Utilize video capture quiz tools. So this is from the Usia platform that we at Lone Star have, but there's any number of tools like this, again, to diversify the kind of assignments and assessments you're using. You know, here I've got a video that I've used from the History Channel on YouTube on a part of US history. Here's kind of the system. You know, this was I don't know, maybe a 4-minute video clip, really well done and put together. You can add a bunch of different questions here. And on the bottom, so this is my view when I create it, you can do short answer, you can do reflective pause, you can do fill in the blank, multiple choice, true, false. And then the students see it like this here on the bottom. You can disable fast forwarding so they're not jumping through the questions. And likewise, as they watch the video, boom, a question pops up at 17 seconds, 26 seconds, a minute. And again, they have to be watching the video in the film and listening and learning to answer sometimes a low stakes question. But again, it's just another way to diversify the sources, diversify the kind of assessments, and skirt the use, the unethical use of AI in the types of assignments we do. Here, I've done a similar one. This is my course overview when I teach online quizzes, going back to one of my previous slides. Here, I've talked about my policy on AI and academic dishonesty and academic integrity. And I've got, you know, this is kind of a 20-question course overview that lasts about 30 minutes. I've talked about my policy. I've used it in a disarming way, I would like to think. And I've just got a true false question here, right? Use of artificial intelligence tools such as ChatGPT is prohibited for writing assignments. And I'm always careful to say, you know, I'll even tell students, I tinker around with AI. I use Google. I even use Wikipedia for background information, for context. But when it comes to writing assignments and I want to see student original work for those particular assignments, for the moment, I have prohibited it, right? And here I say, you know, students are prohibited from.
Left.
Okay. Even to rise them. And I think this is important where I say here, the instructor does not expect expert level historical analysis, scholarship, and writing in this class. It's an intro level survey course. Moreover, the instructor appreciates that many of his students are first year college. So here again, I'm trying to be disarming, let them know that it's okay to make mistakes in their writing, that I just want to see how they've worked through the assignments I've given them. Other ways in your prompts, ask students to take a position, personalize their responses. Here I've got some questions, you know, that I'm happy to share on PowerPoint. I wouldn't go through all of this. One of them down here, how would you teach this topic? Personal reflection. I had an assignment on the taking down of monuments, right? If you ask students to have a stake in their education, have a stake in the assignment, take a position, you'll be amazed that they're just not looking for an answer to spit out, and they will actually spend time and are disincentivized from the writing, from using tools such as ChatGPT if you don't allow that, right? Another thing, give at least 3 examples from the assigned text or videos, actually asking them to engage with the sources. You know, what are some new and meaningful pieces of knowledge you've acquired? Personal reflection, debate. I'll just spend 1 minute on AI detection. I was in a session on this. If you're going to use AI detection, please be aware of how sometimes limited these tools can be. Is it a yellow highlighted paragraph in a 1,000-word essay? Well, don't just flag that as AI and fail the student right away. Talk with the students if you've got a question about their writing. Make sure you have large enough sample sizes. Know that introductory and concluding sentences are more apt to be flagged. Be considerate of, you know, asking students to go to a testing center if there's been multiple cases where a student, you know, it appears they've done this. talk with the student, offer to redo the assignment, compare your students, be empathetic, offer off ramps. And with that, I think, how much time do we have left now?
Chris, you're at 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay, that went even faster. I think I'll open it up for questions now. I was zipping through my slides, fearing I wouldn't have enough time, but if we do have questions, then I am.
Yeah. I have one
Okay.
question that was posed in the Whova app. So I'll go ahead and ask that one, and then we'll see if anyone drops questions in the Q&A. The button's down at the bottom if you'd like to ask a question. So this question is, considering how broad the subject of AI is, how do you embrace the technology and ensure individual work?
Well, I'm actually experimenting with some AI assignments. I've done one recently where I have had students ask a historical figure, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, in effect to interview. And I give them a prompt with a couple of questions to get them started. And the first one is telling ChatGPT, you are Andrew Jackson. Answer the following set of questions as if you were the US president in the 19th century. And it says, okay, ask away. And why did you enact the Indian removal policy? What were your, and ChatGPT will give responses in the persona of that person you ask it to be. And so I give the prompt and I give a couple of questions to get students started. And then I ask them to take the discussion further as if they're a journalist or a historian interviewing this historical figure. And then I ask them to write about the experience based on the assignments and the background reading I gave for this assignment. Was ChatGPT's version of Andrew Jackson in alignment with what we have talked about and what you know about Andrew Jackson and his policies? And some of it's yes, some of it's no, some of it is ChatGPT trying to have it both ways. And then I asked them to reflect on the assignment and then to give me examples and feedback for future assignments of this type. As I've mentioned previously, I use Wikipedia, I use AI, I use all of that for background, context, materials, and I don't prohibit that from students from using it, but I don't use AI to generate my assignments where I copy, paste, and give it to students and then tell them, no, you can't enter in my writing prompts and then copy and paste and enter in them as responses and answers. So I'm still struggling with some of this. I'm still working through it. And I am kind of on a semester by semester approach, monitoring and keeping up with the technology and the ways I can use it and the ways I don't want to use it.
Thank you, Chris. We've got about 4 minutes left. I do not see any questions in the Q&A or the chat.
Okay.
I'll leave that to you with what you want to do with your last 4 minutes.
Okay. I think I'll go back to this slide. Again, diversifying your assignments, your sources, creating unique questions. Mix up the type of questions you ask, including open-ended, I think especially scenario-based questions and personal reflection applications, asking students to draw on their own personal experience, whether it's from a life example, as I try to do in my teaching, or taking a stance, whether it's political, social, or otherwise, helps with problem solving. Or also requiring examples from the sources you assign. Again, I'm big on grading with rubrics. I incorporate mentions of AI in my rubrics. I weight more heavily how closely they've responded to questions. And I find this has improved drastically my workload and the number of instances where I have to confront students, unfortunately, if they violated my academic dishonesty policy. And again, I'll just reiterate on that. Let's not be so punitive. I have heard of faculty knee-jerk just running assignments through an AI detector, and I always read my assignments before even putting it through a detector. and I only do it if I have serious questions about the authenticity of an assignment. And even when we get to that, I think it's important to have an honest conversation with students, not to use the word cheating, not even to use the word plagiarism in discussing that with them. And you might find that if you are convinced that it wasn't AI written, it can be a useful discussion to ask students why it sounds like an AI written post, why a detector might flag it at 100%. So those are useful conversations because that can help students in future classes as well. And I think we all need to be on the same team and the same page here, knowing that students are under pressure, know that students too are engaging with this technology that's new for them. And that I think we all need to be working together as we navigate this kind of new horizon in technology, especially in
Hey,
online
Chris,
education.
I
Yep.
got one question in the chat over here, and we've got about a minute and a
Okay.
half left. Do you
Okay.
review student drafting when you suspect AI generated work?
So this is something I'm going to start doing. I always offer to read student drafts before they submit, and especially when I get an assignment where I believe it has been AI submitted, I will tell the student, send it to me beforehand. Now I've got 150 students a semester, and it's not a writing class, so I don't do that, but I always offer it. And I know there's some new tools, and especially now that we're entering this, I am going to start having students save the original drafts of their work. Oftentimes when I've detected AI writing and asked for it, students will say, oh, well, I deleted the draft and I don't have it. And maybe that's the case. But I think that's a good question. And I think that's yet another step and another layer to skirting AI and humanities for those who do want to skirt it.